I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Chris Eifert.
I think it's important to acknowledge that B2B is different, but I think on the brand side, drawing a distinction between B2C and B2B isn't necessary, right? The differences aren't nearly as stark. Everybody who's making a decision is human. At the end of the day, we're more than likely making a highly irrational and emotional decision based on a feel, kind of a gut instinct that we have about a brand.
Chris Eifert has more than 30 years of sales, marketing, and management experience in a variety of technical industries. He joined Tricom B2B in 2002 and held several management positions before purchasing the company in 2006. Prior to joining Tricom B2B, Chris served in product and marketing management roles for SmartWorks, a strategic business unit of Standard Register, now Taylor Communications. Before that, he held a variety of engineering, sales, product development, and marketing roles at two industrial manufacturers, Flowserve Corporation and Watlow Electric Company. His experience also includes training and business development support in Europe, Asia, and South America. My interview with Chris Eifert is coming right up. But first,
my dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hi, I'm Jason Falls, the executive producer of the Marketing Podcast Network. As you probably know, Asheville and western North Carolina were nearly destroyed by Hurricane Helene in late September. The Red Cross has deemed this a Category 7 disaster, which is the largest category they give. One of our member podcasters, Patrick Casale, is on the front lines there. He's an Asheville native who is living through and witnessing the trauma, destruction, and recovery his family, friends, and fellow community members are going through. Patrick started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for relief efforts. All donations through Patrick's fundraiser go to local nonprofits who are helping with supply runs. Donations there directly impact people in need. I've given to the fund personally. Patrick has given as well, despite the fact he's having to recover too. The Marketing Podcast Network wants to help, and we know you do too. Visit Patrick's campaign at bit.ly/WNC help. The abbreviation is for Western North Carolina, WNC. bit.ly/WNC help. Any amount goes a long way. Even just $5 can provide a few gallons of clean drinking water to a family in need. Please join us in helping the relief and recovery efforts in Asheville and western North Carolina. Go to bit.ly/WNC help today and contribute. That's bit.ly/WNC help. The full URL, bit.ly/WNC help. Donate what you can. Every dollar helps.
Chris Eifert, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
So what's a technical backgrounded guy like you doing in an industry like marketing? You've come from a very different background than many, but how did that lead you here?
That's a great question. I don't think there's enough time on your podcast for the full story, Nick, to be honest with you. And I get to ask that a lot because there aren't a lot of people with engineering backgrounds, at least by education, that end up on the agency side of things. So I guess to make a long story short, while I was educated and kind of brought into my first career as an engineer, I quickly learned that my strengths lied in client-facing roles, right? And maybe selling and marketing the products that I was engineering more so than the actual engineering itself. So just through a series of events, I ended up in some technical selling roles and then eventually some product management and marketing leadership roles at different manufacturing and technology companies. And really, I just felt that was the way my career should bend, and I kept pursuing it in that direction. And before you know it, I'm working with marketing agencies, and one that I discovered was at that time Tricom Marketing and Communications, and I joined the agency side and eventually took over as an owner.
Well, again, it like you said, is not a path. We don't get a lot of engineers on the show. Get a lot of designers, even people with a social science background. But when it comes to your own technical background and the type of clients that you'd serve, that's where it really seems like the metaphor that comes to mind is the chocolate and the peanut butter coming together in the Reese's peanut butter cup. But with your background and leading a B2B marketing firm, these are often very technically driven organizations. Have you found that your background is well suited for the clients that you're working with today?
Yeah, very much so, Nick. I think, one of the first things we did, and by the way, my business partner, John Buscemi, is an accountant. So I think we're probably the only agency in North America that's led by an engineer and an accountant. So you can imagine we get a lot of sideways looks. But we've been very successful at it. And part of the reason for that is really an early on recognition. And this goes back to, so we bought the agency in 2006, but by 2008, we really recognized that the technical considered purchase space at least on the agency side was really underrepresented. There weren't a lot of agencies at that time anyway that were focused on B2B, and especially not those that really had complex products, technical offerings. And so we quickly decided to reposition the business and ultimately rebrand it Tricom B2B, because we had some special capability. We had multiple engineers at the time working for the business. And we were able to get things and kind of understand the go-to-market in B2B, where other agencies, I think, really focused more on creative. We were really more focused on the business aspects of what our clients were trying to do. Now, of course, you can't just solely rely on that. Creative is a huge component of being in an agency, in the agency world, but we were able to figure it out from the business perspective first, and then really augment our capabilities over time with kind of the world-class creative that needs to support that, and ultimately the world-class media capabilities that need to combine with that.
So when it comes to B2B marketing, especially when we talk about the topic of brand building, this is often a kind of a disconnect, because we're very different in B2B. It's a different sales cycle. Sometimes there's, and we're inundated with examples that are, the ones that we hear the most about are from the consumer side of things. Is there a disconnect in B2B marketing and the importance of brand building?
Yes and no, Nick. I think the value of brand building in B2B is just starting to experience a resurgence, and we're really thankful for that. There's been some unbelievable work done by people like Les Binet and Paul Fields, who published The Long and the Short of It quite a while ago, that talked about the balance between brand and demand and why that's so important for sustained long-term growth. So there's some momentum building in that space, but there is still a disconnect in terms of maybe the importance that's being applied to brand marketing versus kind of what I would call lower funnel sales activation. We went through a period of time, probably for the last decade, where most B2B marketers, including agencies, became kind of obsessed with demand generation, right? And the lead capture and the lead funnel, and trying to accelerate to pipeline. And that's great. It's an important part of marketing, but it really was receiving almost all of the attention. So, the problem there, of course, is that you're only really targeting a fraction, the smallest fraction of your audience that's actually in market for buying at that time. And not having the brand building component mixed into your marketing efforts really hurts those businesses that are ignoring the 95% of their buyers that really aren't interested in your lower funnel sales activation. So yeah, there's a disconnect for sure.
Well, and it's almost like, yes, it's a different type of consumer, but it's still a human being. And I think that we sometimes, on the B2B side of things, sell ourselves short in thinking that there's not a human who is making the same kind of emotion-driven decisions that consumers are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to acknowledge that B2B is different, and that's okay. B2B is different. Long sales cycles, the relationship components are quite personal. There's a lot of one-to-one and one-to-few relationship building that goes on B2B that really doesn't exist in B2C. But I think on the brand side, I think drawing a distinction between B2C and B2B isn't necessary, right? It's the differences aren't nearly as stark. As you mentioned, everybody's making a decision is human, right? And no matter how many spreadsheets we build with our weighted averages applied to supplier attributes as we try to make decisions on who to work with, at the end of the day, we're more than likely making a highly irrational and emotional decision based on a feel, kind of a gut instinct that we have about a brand or about the people that are representing the brand. So when I think about B2B and B2C from a brand perspective, I honestly don't differentiate that much. In 2018, I don't know if your listeners will have seen this study, but Bain and Company did a wonderful study on what they call the B2B elements of value. And they proved pretty definitively that the decisions that are being made in business to business that are being made at that kind of individual and inspirational level. So the brands that are connecting with decision makers and helping them realize some personal or professional need, or maybe even relating to them in some way that's, kind of like, what do they hope for as human beings, or what do they aspire to? Those are the brands that win, and the ones that are living in that space that's individual and inspirational and emotive in B2B, not just in B2C, but also in B2B. Those are the ones that are winning.
Well, I think that's such a good point, because I think that we tend to, like you said at the beginning, it's important to understand that B2B is different, but I think where we go too far is endowing the B2B consumer with an almost robotic-like status, when it's exactly what you said, that there's a human over there bringing those same human traits to what's ultimately a B2B sale. So where do you start with understanding that customer and how they're different on the B2B side of things?
Well, I think like any good marketing professional, whether it's on the client side or within the agency side, it does start with just really understanding, the audience that you're going after and what makes them tick, right? What matters to them. Now, there are limitations to how far that can go depending on the resources you have. You'll see in the large agency space a lot that, they're hiring behavioral scientists, right, to not just perform surveys, but to actually kind of peel away the layers of what they're seeing in research to understand what's driving decisions. And you get some really fascinating results from doing that. But I think the most important thing you can do, there are a lot of tools. You can go online, you can use AI, and you can find out information about buyer personas very quickly now. But I was reminded the other day by one of our teammates here that the information we find from speaking directly with our clients' customers is so invaluable. The things that we hear that no one else is hearing, and that, because we're having that kind of intimate conversation with them, they feed so much of the way we want to go to market and the way we want to communicate. There's always something special in that kind of face-to-face interview. So that's where it all starts for us, is really having great conversations with our clients' customers and kind of going from there.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Jason Falls, the executive producer of the Marketing Podcast Network. As you probably know, Asheville and Western North Carolina were nearly destroyed by Hurricane Helene in late September. The Red Cross has deemed this a Category 7 disaster, which is the largest category they give. One of our member podcasters, Patrick Casale, is on the front lines there. He's an Asheville native who is living through and witnessing the trauma, destruction, and recovery his family, friends, and fellow community members are going through. Patrick started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for relief efforts. All donations through Patrick's fundraiser go to local nonprofits who are helping with supply runs. Donations there directly impact people in need. I've given to the fund personally. Patrick has given as well, despite the fact he's having to recover too. The Marketing Podcast Network wants to help, and we know you do too. Visit Patrick's campaign at bit.ly/WNC help. The abbreviation is for Western North Carolina, WNC. bit.ly/WNC help. Any amount goes a long way. Even just $5 can provide a few gallons of clean drinking water to a family in need. Please join us in helping the relief and recovery efforts in Asheville and Western North Carolina. Go to bit.ly/WNC help today and contribute. That's bit.ly/WNC help. The full URL, bit.ly/WNC help. Donate what you can. Every dollar helps.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
Now, back to the show. So I want to talk about something else that I know is a passion of yours, and that is kind of the interesting interplay between executive leadership personal brands and the organizations that they lead, because I think that sometimes we see when this goes really well, or maybe we don't see it as much. It's not as obvious. But then when we see a leader trip and fall and stumble, we can see that reflecting on the brand as well. So how do you balance the building of a personal brand of a leader with the institutional brand of the organization?
That's a great question, Nick. I think when we think about kind of a modern day contemporary brand versus what it used to be, right, which was your kind of your logo and your messaging and your brand expression, your visual components and your themes and your advertising, right, kind of created what at least you wanted your brand to be perceived by and the space you want to occupy in your markets. You know, that was kind of the pre-digital, era view of what a brand was. And I think because today there's so much access to human beings digitally, right, and so much access to information, the way a brand gets portrayed and delivered into the market needed to change along with that. And I think really savvy leaders, the executives, the CEOs that lead these companies, understand that there is a great opportunity there for them to take a personal role in delivering the brand message. And, recently I had an opportunity to work on a project where we were profiling some unbelievable women CEOs in the Fortune 500, really just to kind of create a guidebook on what makes for kind of a great leader, a great communicator of their brands. And I ran across just so many unbelievable people. But Mary Barra from General Motors, Karen Lynch from CVS Health, Jane Fraser from Citi. There's so much to admire about what they're doing, and they're so good at communicating around their brand. But they do it in a way, Nick, that's really personal, right? They're really willing to be vulnerable and tell their personal stories and be really authentic. And it kind of creates this accessibility and relatability, not just to them personally, but to their companies. And I think the ability to have a platform and personal philosophy that you're willing to communicate and do that on behalf of your company as a leader, I think it's just exponentially more effective than just letting your marketing do the work for you.
I couldn't agree more, but I think what gets in the way is it seems scary, that vulnerability, especially as you climb the ladder and the stakes get higher. And to say nothing of being a woman or a person of color or another underrepresented individual in the C-suite. So, where can you start to maybe put a toe in the water thinking about executive personal branding in a way that might seem constructive and safe?
Yeah. So the one thing that all of these leaders have in common that are really good at this is they have a platform. They have something they care deeply about. And that might be very business oriented, right? Dr. Lisa Su from AMD. I mean, she's very passionate about AI and technology. She was a computer science engineer who was always in the lab doing skunkworks work. And that's just what she loves, right? So her personal platform is very business oriented. But I tell you what, she can deliver on that message over and over, and she owns that space. But it can also be very personal in the sense that I mentioned Karen Lynch from CVS Health. She has a huge mental health platform that she speaks to, and she's very passionate about. I think you mentioned the word vulnerable, and to me, that vulnerability is really important. If you want to portray really an authentic brand expression into the market, every one of these leaders has a platform that they believe in and they advocate for, and they're very willing to be involved and visible on that. And you said a small step to take. Maybe that's a big step to take, but I don't think you can do this incrementally and expect a big result. I think you have to be willing to stand for something, make that part of your personal brand, try to connect it to your business in some way, and therefore become really relatable. But I think that's the one thing they all share in common, is having that platform that they're really passionate about.
So in building a platform like that, like you mentioned, happening over time, is there I mean, again, with something like that, and with any personal brand, there's no one size fits all approach. Is it important to choose something that fits the leader's own personality?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, this isn't something, and I would say this, whether this is the brand itself, the company, or it's the human beings that represent it. I mean, if you can't stand behind it and people can't feel that it's authentic and something that really connects with you, you're going to be exposed at some point as just maybe placating an audience or trying to say the right thing, but not really wanting to do the hard work of actually making it happen. So yeah, I think it just needs to be something that connects really well personally, something that you believe in, that people will understand as authentic. And if you start from there, I think the more people learn about you and get a sense for the type of person you are, the more likely they are to connect and like the business that you lead or represent. We hear customers say all the time that, we want to be the Apple of, fill in the blank. We want to be the Apple of fill in the blank. And to that, I always say, well, first of all, there's only one Apple, and Apple only works for Apple. We need to figure out what you are and find something about you that relates to your audience that's super compelling, and just be you, right? And that takes a little bit of work. And that, again, this isn't only about the leader, but it can also be about the business, right? What does the business itself believe in? What issue in the market are they addressing really well that they can have a kind of a provocative point of view on? But it has to be something they believe in and are willing to put the work into.
I was going to ask you, you gave a much better answer and a much more useful answer to get out of the mindset. But earlier when I was talking about, kind of the other baggage that we bring to B2B branding conversations is the accessibility of the Apples, the Nikes of the world. You gave a much better answer of that's the wrong goal. But I have to ask, do you ever As someone in the B2B space, is there a B2B brand that you're like, that's really the gold standard, the Apple, the Nike, the aspirational B2B brand that really gets it?
On the B2B side, and I'm going to be a little bit self-serving here because it's one of our clients, but one of the brands that I really respect and appreciate in what they're doing is Cummins. And Cummins couldn't be more heavy industrial. I mean, they make diesel engines, right? And they make a lot of power generation equipment that relates to that diesel engine space. But they also they're just really open about the journey that they're on in terms of kind of the energy transition and the way they're approaching that, the way that their destination zero and Project 2050 initiatives that they're pursuing, the way that their leaders, Jennifer Rumsey, the CEO of that company, communicate. They're doing it right. And I think in terms of what they express into the market, they're very open. You can feel the authenticity of it. And I think they're getting it right at a lot of different levels. And it's kind of super exciting to see how they're communicating into the market right now.
I love that. And I love that when we have B2B marketing conversations, because I do feel like just out of habit, we mention the same brands. And I think it forces us to think of some others too. So as we start to wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you, as we send people out into the world to rethink their brand building and marketing, what's one thing that you think most are missing when it comes to brand building today?
Well, I'll go back to the concept of being vulnerable and open. And I know this is hard. I mean, I know we have clients, many that are publicly traded companies, and so you say the word vulnerable to them, it's like, oh my gosh, what is he talking about? and how does that really apply? But I think there are different levels to that, and there's still a belief, I think, in a lot of B2B institutions that you have to be serious and sober and kind of go with the tried and true way of communicating, so that you just, hey, let's not rock the boat. Let's not stand out too much. Let's stick to the playbook and be kind of investor oriented. I think applying maybe just a little bit more courage into the decision making, especially around how we communicate as marketers, and wanting to stand out, and maybe not take ourselves so seriously in some cases. I think there's a lot to be earned there in terms of audience attention and trust. So whether it's vulnerability or whether that's courage or just a willingness to maybe not stick to the same old playbook, I think those are all of the things that are probably missing in a lot of B2B enterprises. But like I said earlier on in our conversation, I also think there's a lot of progress being made there as well. There's a lot of people who are really looking at creative and looking at brand building through a different lens now. And I think that's a really positive thing for our industry.
Awesome. Well, a great message, great advice. As we wrap things up, Chris, what is a brand that has made you smile recently?
That's a pretty easy question, because my daughters and I are kind of obsessed with Liquid Death as a brand. And if you're not familiar with Liquid Death, it's water in a can. It's not that complicated. And I don't know if you don't know me all that well, all that personally, but I really like kind of irreverent humor, people that don't take themselves too seriously, or don't come off as too self-important. I like to keep things light and be around people that are like that. And Liquid Death kind of embodies all of that. I was reading about them not too long ago, and something about their marketing strategy and their creative strategy said something along the lines of, you know what we do? We go with the dumbest idea. And so they put all of these ideas out on the table, right, for the next campaign or their whatever their next program is going to be. And their mantra is, let's go with the dumbest one and make that work. And because of that, they're edgy, they're humorous, they create these really funny mock advertisements. They've even got a Spotify album of their worst reviews and comments. So they just do things that are different. They do take risks, but they do also have a soul. I mean, there are things they care about in terms of trying to keep young people healthy, the plastic pollution issue that exists. So they're very irreverent. It appeals to me a lot, but they also have a soul. So I would say Liquid Death for sure.
Well said, and I like describing it as them having a soul. I think more brands should.
Amen.
Chris, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, I guess I would start with our agency, Tricom B2B, is www.tricomb2b.com. And if you want to learn about me, I'm on LinkedIn at /Chris Eifert.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Chris Eifert, thanks for being on brand with us.
Appreciate the opportunity, Nick. Thank you.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennica Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennica, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennicawatkinsporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.